lọ fẹ́ gbọdọ̀ náà ẹ̀kọ́ tó ní bọ́ ṣe ní títà wò wá tí wọ́n bá yàn ṣe é fáṣẹ ní ìṣẹ́ títà wọ́n lè fún ìpè tó bọ́ ṣe fún àbẹ̀ ìpè tó bá ìlú ìpè tó ní wọ́n á lọ wá
kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
So good morning, everyone from here. I'm not sure if they're ready to begin because they're still muted on that side. So we'll wait a little bit.
Yes, I think you are at liberty to decide whether to wait a few more minutes or to begin as you want.
Okay. So let's just wait a couple minutes. I think there might be someone else that needs to join.
Yes, yes. There's one more panelist who is not here yet.
Okay. We'll just wait a couple more minutes. Thank you.
All right. Attendees. And pause recording, but please don't forget to start.
Okay. So good morning from here. I am at the University of California. My name is Dr. Martin, and I am a professor of history and critical race and ethnic studies. I teach specifically on African women and gender, but more specifically Nigerian women and Nigerian women's history. I'm actually writing an intellectual history of Nigerian women's activism, starring Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. And so that's a little bit about me and what I do. But here today, we're going to do something and talk about something that's really close to my heart, really near and dear to me. It's about mentorship, really. So we're going to be doing a discussion, having a discussion all centered around applying to graduate school. And that's something that I do with my own business. It's I can give you more information on my business, but it's called Wasimi, and we do educational consulting. And so a lot of the topics that we'll discuss here today are something that I love to do just in my professional field, as well as in my business. A lot of people might not know that there is a rhythm and a rhyme, there's a pattern to being accepted and to doing applications and doing well on applications for graduate school, whether you're, or if you're studying for the graduate record examination, the GRE exam. There's a rhythm and a rhyme that goes with that. There are things, there are steps, there's a process that you can follow. And a lot of times, you know, there's success when you have something, you put together a plan, a map. And as my father would say, you plan your work and you work your plan. So there's a lot of success that can come from that. So we want to turn to the professionals here who have done what a lot of you are hoping to do, which is to apply and to, you know, get your degree abroad. So we have Susan Isayin here from Princeton. We have Elizabeth Adeyemo here from the University of Notre Dame, and also Chisara Agoha, who are going to speak to us about their process. So I kind of want to just start off with the question for all of you, for all of our panelists. And then I'll also give time, you know, for all of you who are there in the room to ask questions too. But I just want to start off by asking you to introduce yourselves and your program, your degree, and why you chose the university that you chose.
Okay, I wanted to go ahead, but Chisara can.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. So my name is Chisara Agoha. I am doing my PhD program at the University of Calgary. And I just finished my candidacy last month. I'm currently in Nigeria doing my research. I'm at the Archives at the moment. So why I chose my university is basically because Professor Stapleton, who is my supervisor, is a good fit for me. Over the first time I applied was in 2020, which was in 2019 when I didn't get my first admission. And I felt so bad because I wanted him so badly to be my supervisor, so I would say and looking at his work and knowing how much he comes here to do his work too, that made me feel, aside from academia, I felt that he is very, even till now, we used to tease him that he's very much African. So I think that I just wanted him to supervise me. So he was the reason I chose that school.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Susan Isayan. I am a third-year PhD candidate at Princeton University's history program. And my research interests encompass the historical examination of infectious skin diseases, especially yaws and leprosy. And that is where I've been working with. I look at how the skin diseases intersect with science, medicine, and colonial governance in colonial Nigeria and Ghana. And I did apply for the PhD program sometime in 2019. And I chose Princeton University because there sits a very tremendous faculty of accomplished African historians whose works on social history are pathbreaking. There is, for example, Professor Jacob Lamini, whose well-structured and accessible approach to understanding the complexity surrounding South Africa's post-apartheid history is both articulate and striking. And another distinguished historian that I looked forward to working with, and I ended up working with him. He's at present my advisor, is Professor Emmanuel Krike. He has done tremendous work on the analysis of the disintegration and reconstruction of the society of Wanyama under colonial rule. I just could not, overlook that tremendous faculty that exists in Princeton and the amount of work that they put into publishing works and the methodologies that they work with. And so the themes, methodologies, the approaches that I was interested in and that I believe would be central to my own work on West Africa was what drew me to the history program at Princeton University.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I am a rising fifth-year doctorate candidate at the University of Notre Dame, specifically the Department of Anthropology. I'm an archaeologist. My first degree was in Ibadan. So after my first degree, just a little bit of background here, I did a master's degree at UCL, so University College London in Qatar. And I hope that that kind of comes into the conversation subsequently about how it's important to not overlook certain regions or countries around the world when applying to grad school. That's the reason I'm emphasizing that. So it's UCL Qatar. And after then, I had a short work stint internationally, and I did get accepted to the University of Cambridge, but there was no funding for me. The funding was very limited. So again, it might be important to emphasize that. And eventually I started at the University of Notre Dame. And for me, Notre Dame was just a fantastic place to carry out my research. And I would anchor that on 3 points. First, the support I received from Notre Dame in terms of faculty mentorship and even peer-to-peer mentorship, colleague interaction. It was fantastic before I even accepted my offer. So that really drew me to Notre Dame. The other point, which I think is also very important for, as I've mentioned, for my trajectory, is funding. I was attracted to the funding that Notre Dame offered and the network that Notre Dame offered as well. So both alumni network and student network. So those were really the attractive points for me selecting Notre Dame.
Yeah, thank you all for those answers. And one thing that I heard, one thing that I guess the audience can take away from that is that you should look for schools that can support your interests, that have faculty, that have resources, that have libraries, that have information that will strongly support whatever your interests are, whatever type of research you want to do. One thing that you don't want to do is try to get into a school or get accepted to a school where they don't have the support, the faculty mentors that you might need. You don't want to, get into a situation where you don't have whatever it is that you need to go forward. And also, it's very important to understand, first of all, to cast your net broadly, as Elizabeth was saying. Don't only just look at one school or one particular area, one place. Cast your net broadly, apply broadly to different schools, but also be very aware of the funding. Funding can be an issue. So generally here in the US, and especially in the University of California system, we do give 5 full years of funding. And especially at the campus that I'm at, we give 5 full years of funding. And so you have to be aware of whether your school is going to give you full funding, if they're going to give you partial funding, if some of that funding is going to require you to teach or to be a TA or something like that, or a research assistant. You just have to be aware of what they're offering you. And don't be afraid to compare. So if you get accepted to more than one school, you compare. Which school has more support, more funding, more resources, be discriminating, because this is your life, this is your degree, and this is your research. This is something that's going to follow you, throughout your scholarly career. So we're going to move on to the next subject. And like I said, there will be some time for questions in the end. So if you have any questions, please write them down and then we'll have time to ask those. So we're going to move on to the next, subject, which is the exam. So you have to take examinations a lot of times to get into the university. I know I definitely had to take an exam when I came out of high school and another exam before I got into graduate school. And so that graduate exam is the GRE. And then there's other entrance exams. But one interesting thing that happened during COVID is that a lot of schools here, just speaking here from the US, there are a lot of schools, even Ivy League schools here, that actually don't require some of these exams anymore, like the TOEFL or the GRE, because they've understood, especially coming from a racialized context like the US, that there are groups of people who have challenges to obtaining a quality education. And that means that they might not be able to score highly on exams like, maybe other groups that have been better prepared or had more resources in their schools and so on and so forth. So they wanted to remove that barrier, that obstacle, what could be a barrier or an obstacle to some students. And so some schools here don't even require those exams anymore. My university is one of them. My campus is one of them. And so you can find campuses, you can find universities that do not require the GRE or the TOEFL. And sometimes they do. So if you're coming from an English speaking country like Nigeria, then you could also petition for the TOEFL to be waived so that you don't have to take that exam. So you just have to speak to the head of the department or whoever it is, the administrative assistant of the department that you're applying to. But I want to turn it over to our distinguished panelists and ask Elizabeth, I guess we can start with you, about your experience with the GRE, and the TOEFL. You all probably had to take yours because this was just since the pandemic that they, kind of moved towards waiving those. So what was your experience? What kind of practical, again, I'm really centered on practical tips. I like to give my students and my advisees, my mentees, practical tips and steps that they could follow and apply and personalize to themselves on how they could achieve certain things. So what are some practical steps that you took to prepare for the GRE and also the TOEFL, and what was your experience with those exams?
Okay, thank you, Maria. So with regards to GRE and TOEFL, I think Maria really hit the point on the head about strategies to do those things or to get them going. And emphasis on the fact that many schools have adjusted how they approach GRE as a qualifying factor for international students. And from my experience, my personal experience, and also supporting grad students over the years, I would say that for Nigerians, we do have GNS or GES experience in undergrad for the most part. So that might be able to cover your TOEFL or your IELTS. So applying to US schools or any school in the world, in any country around the world. So it might be possible for you to take that result if your school can provide that for you. Because I know University of Ibadan does that, where I graduated from. We used to have use of English, English one, GNS, I can't remember, GS 101 or something like that. I know Unilag also has, I know many schools in Nigeria does that. So it might be possible for you to extract that result. So go to your GNS center or your GS center from your university, ask them to write a letter or to provide a document that shows that you've had a course like GS or GNS that says you've done English as a first language, blah, blah, blah. Then take that document and send it to the admission office of the university you're applying to and ask specifically if that covers the English language requirements from that university. So if it does cover that, then it might save you the funding or even the stress of having to prepare for TOEFL. But if it does not, then you would have to prepare for the exam and then take the exam. For GRE as well, again, it's a different season now. Many schools are waiving it. Another point that I would make before I go on to a little bit of strategy is that when you write GRE and you get a score, don't push your score to the back of the door and just say, oh, I'm not going to get admitted because I got a very low score. Don't do that. Don't give up on your admission because your GRE score to you is not great. So what I would really suggest is once you get the GRE score, write to the institution you're applying to and say, oh, I just got back my test result. I mean, this is not verbatim, don't quote me or anything, but the idea is write to them and say, this is what I got. This is my test score. Do you think that this makes me competitive or this is sufficient enough for me to get into the program? Or would you suggest that I rewrite the exam, right? And in that case, they would respond to you most likely, especially if you have if you're applying to very responsive institutions, they would respond to you and tell you either to rewrite the exam or, oh, it's fine, you don't have to rewrite it, it's just a checkbox on the list of your application requirements. However, if you feel that it might make you a bit more competitive to apply, to get a better score, you can then retake GRE if you would like. So that's that. Personally, how I prepared for it, I studied for many months. I don't think it's, I think Maria also mentioned it, that you work hard and then you plan hard, you work your plan. I think that really applies to all of these test examinations. So TOEFL, IELTS, or GRE, you really do have to practice, primarily because there is a strategy to it. Many of the questions, there is a guideline to it. And once you are able to familiarize yourself with that guideline or the foundational questions, then it really does help. And getting familiar means practicing more and more. I would really say maybe set aside at least a month. I know for many people applying to grad school, you have other things that you do focus on in your life while applying to grad school. But I would say that you have to be intentional about this exam. So set aside at least a month. Practice, there are practice tests online, there are free resources online. And for GRE specifically, I would say that go to GRE website. I think that was what really did it for me. There is a resource. I can't remember the name of the resource now for the life of me, but it really breaks down all of the formulas, because I think there's algebra, there are certain sections that you have to practice for and prepare for, but then it breaks down all of the formula for each section. And once you are able to understand that resource, I can tell you that your GRE score would improve significantly. And for me, it was really funny because I found the resource like a night before my exam. So I started to panic, and I did all I could to practice as much as I could using that resource before my exam, and really that helped. So now that you know about this, if you can find it, I can't remember the resource right now, maybe some of the other panelists know it, but I can look it up while we're talking. If I find it, then I would share it. But I would say if you're writing GRE, try to look for the resource on the GRE website.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist.
I can proceed. I mean, Maria, you said it all. Before the pandemic, I can confidently say that if you apply to almost any school in the United States, you will enter the graduate record examination. But a lot has changed since the pandemic, where most schools in the US no longer require this as a part of the application process. However, I guess it is still, fundamental to know that this kind of standardized tests exist. And because the application process in every graduate institution diverges from place to place, you might be required to prepare for and take the examination. From my experience, I did take GRE about 4 years ago, and had to allow at least 6 weeks or more to prepare for it. It was a very tedious examination that required time management and efficient analytical skills. There are, I think, 4 parts to the GRE. There is what is called the issue task section, where you are expected to write a very persuasive and well-structured and thought-out essay as a response to a particular prompt on either education, arts, history, technology, and so on. There is also the argument task, which requires the examinee to either validate or invalidate the authenticity or bogus claims of someone else. And there are at least 2 other sections which we know as the verbal and quantitative segments. So it was important for me to plan well ahead and choose a study regimen that works for me, because it was not a walk in the park. There are like a list of downloadable study materials online that made planning easy and that allowed for some sort of familiarity with examination. And because the GRE is a critical criterion of some graduate school application processes in some American institutions or program, I think it's significant to plan well ahead, to practice writing, and I'm sure it will pay off in the GRE.
Okay, and Chisara?
So I first want to share my experience to emphasize what the first speaker said. So I didn't know. I took a GRE and TOEFL. But for TOEFL, I didn't know that for my school, University of Calgary, I didn't need any proof of English test. So I did. So I want to emphasize what the first speaker said. You have to ask. It is not enough to ask your friends that both of you are applying together about these questions. You have to send emails to your school, the graduate admin, to find out if you really need this. So for my friends who were going to the US, I thought, oh, okay, they were taking the same exam, so I needed the same too. So just don't be like me. Ask questions from the school, And so for my preparation, I would say the same thing the 2 panel members have already said. Just prepare. And one thing I also want to say from my experience, if you are like me, you don't like quantitative, you don't like anything math, I wouldn't want you to be discouraged if the United States is where you really want to go school. So I would say you should give yourself enough time to practice. You know, give yourself enough time to practice, work on those solutions, work on your math. I'm sorry, I'm in the archive, so some noise. So work on those math problems, do them over and over. If you have a friend who could put you through the solution, that was what I did. I know that mathematics is not my thing at all. So I had to meet friends who were good in mathematics, who studied statistics and math, to help me put me through things. So you have to also ask for help when you need one. That's just what I want to say from my own experience, so that it doesn't discourage you from applying to the schools or to the country you want to apply to. So that's just my contribution. But for the University of Calgary, I didn't need both GRE and TOEFL or IELTS, any of that I didn't need to.
Okay, thank you so much for that explanation too. I mean, I think one thing that we can take away from that conversation is that when you're looking at applying abroad, you should, especially now, check to see if the GRE and the TOEFL are even required. Is the school requiring this? And if the school that you want to go to does require it and you take the exam, if you think that you haven't scored high enough, don't just assume that. Ask them, you know, with the score that I have, is this sufficient to apply to and to get into this program? So make sure that you're asking, and then also make sure that you map out time to study and that you gather some resources so that you could study. All right, and it might be good if you can to get a tutor to, you know, help you to study for those exams. So now we want to move on to our next subject. So I want to ask this question. You kind of already touched on it before, and it's about, you know, your graduate program. So you shared with us why you chose that program, but how did you actually choose your program? Because you probably applied to several schools. You might have applied to schools in different countries. You know, so you might have applied in the US, UK, or wherever, the Netherlands, Asia. You might have applied broadly. So how did you actually choose your specific program, and what was that process like for you? So Chisara, I guess we could start with you, and then Elizabeth, and then Susan.
So how I chose my program, first I want to say that I'm in African history, and that has been the same program I did for my undergrad, master's, and I wanted to go on with that for my PhD. You know, so that is basically what has guided me over the period. And looking at what I'm working on, which is I'm working on prostitution in Southeast, that particular area to work on. First, I knew I wanted to work. I was on gender, you know, gender history. However, this particular research topic, I was helped by my professor, you know, who was like suggested a lot of, and was like, why do you want to work on child marriage? How much information do you think you would want to do that? You are very passionate about women, you know, why don't you do this? And I said, okay, I would have to research on that. So I went researching on that. And then when I was applying, I looked for departments who had that good fit for me. And that was how
Thank you. I would say that there are two approaches to this that I'm familiar with. The first is the career approach, and the second is the subject approach. And I've used both. And first, for the subject approach, I think that resounds to what Shisara just shared. Like, she had a research in mind that she wanted to do. She knew what she wanted to do with that and went for that, right? However, the career approach is a bit different because it relies more on the future that you see for yourself. So, for example, if you studied English in undergrad and you decide that you want to build a career in communication, for example, or HR or something different, I think it might be much more fruitful for you to research a course that allows you to build the career that you desire for yourself in grad school, because that course is then what gives you that landing pad to pivot into the career that you see yourself going into. And I think for me, that's happened to me because after my first degree in archaeology, I then applied to a master's program in conservation science. And that was because I wanted, I saw the potential of having a career in conservation because that's not a very popular thing in Nigeria. We don't have a lot of formally trained conservators to work with museum objects and things like that. So I felt like that was a gap I wanted to fill. So I needed the training, I needed the experience. And so I applied for a master's program in conservation science. However, for my PhD, I knew I wanted to do a PhD all my life, but it was a difficult task for me to pick a PhD degree in conservation science because I struggled really hard to come up with a topic that I wanted to do for a PhD in conservation science. So what I did instead was to reflect on myself and the skill set and the career that I saw for myself and the kind of program that allows me to do what I need to do down the line. So after my PhD, what do I really want to do with my life, right? And so that led me to go back to archaeology, apply for a PhD degree in archaeology in the US. It's a subfield of anthropology, right? So again, the point is, what are you thinking? Are you thinking about your career or are you thinking about a subject? And I think that should influence your selection of a grad program or a grad topic.
This was perhaps one of the most critical parts of wanting to pursue graduate studies as a whole, because graduate school requires commitment through and through. And so I had to ask myself if I was choosing a graduate program because I just want to relocate, or if I really had some interests that I wanted to broaden on in grad school. I knew that if I succeeded in getting in, it would be my passion for the field that I chose, my access to the faculty member that I had connected with, the resources and learning options that I would be exposed to, and those academic interests that made me map out a plan of enrolling in graduate school that would ultimately keep me in the running. So in choosing a graduate program, whether it's a master's or PhD program, it is important to first self-reflect on what your research interests are, what kind of program you think might help you to develop yourself professionally and academically, and this with your long-term goals. There's also the idea of looking through university websites. What kind of programs are they offering? What is the coursework like? How long do you need to do coursework before the qualifying examinations? How much time are graduate students giving to prepare for these examinations? Would you have to juggle teaching assistantships and learning to support yourself financially? In most institutions, the graduate school administrator often have the answers to these questions. So it was important for me to reach out and ask these questions. I was as specific as possible. I reached out to other students in the program. I asked them very precise questions about the school environment, cost of living in the area, academic support, childcare options, questions. Should I have children or intend on becoming a parent? And more general questions about the program that I am applying to. So it was, for me, it was important to know the weight of these things before choosing my institution and reaching out to a potential advisor or professor that I wanted to work with.
Again, that's such a great conversation and such wisdom that, you all are sharing with us. And a few tips I think that maybe we could take away from that conversation is that one big thing actually that I notice with students that I mentor. So I have definitely, brought students here or mentored students. I have advisees in Nigeria right now. Some of them, actually, I have a couple of fellowships at the University of Ibadan, and some of those students have already done their PhD, have graduated, have also gone abroad. Some of them are there now, they've gotten their PhD from there, and I'm helping them to apply to positions, to faculty positions and other positions in the US and other countries, research positions, all of that. And one thing that I notice with students that I'm helping and advising is that sometimes, because they're worried about not getting into a school or not getting a job, they try to conform to what the job is asking for, instead of looking for jobs or looking for schools that align with their interests. And I think that's something that we could take away from the conversation that we just heard, is to apply to schools that are attached to your interests, that would help you to develop your interests, that would support you. So obviously your interests and your research interests are important, but what about your support outside of that? Do you have children? Do you prefer a metropolitan area? Do you prefer a rural area? What kinds of things would help you and support you in this pursuit of this degree, of this program? So make sure you're looking for schools and choosing schools that will definitely have the faculty support. Also talk to faculty. One thing that I tell students all the time is that we, the professors, are the ones that do the accepting. So if you apply here and you write on your statement, and this is something that we'll talk about too, because the panel will next address statements and how to write these statements, especially the statements of purpose and personal histories and things like that that they ask for in the applications to grad school. But I tell students that in your application materials, you have to name the professors that you want to speak to or that you want to work with. And then you have to say exactly how that professor could help you in your pursuit of this specific degree. And a lot of times what I will tell them, even before they, get to the stage of writing these statements, you need to reach out to the professors and you need to talk to them. You need to start a conversation with them. And then you can work around to asking them, are you accepting students? Because we have research interests that are similar. One thing you want to do is look up these professors, see what their research is, and look and see how their research is similar to yours. And then you reach out to them and say that, oh, I've seen that your research is around this topic, and I'm looking at a similar topic, or I'm using a similar theory, or I'm using similar data collection methods. And I would love to ask you a question about how you did X, Y, and Z, because I'm also looking to do the same thing. And as you have that conversation with them, you open up a conversation, allow them to talk to you in their area of expertise. And then you ask them, later, oh, so I love this conversation. And I would love to continue it as well. So are you accepting students right now? So you just build a conversation, and then you ask them, are you accepting students? And then if they say yes, then you have a faculty advocate now on the inside who will help you. And let me just explain the process a little bit. When you apply, they send us all of your applications, especially the ones that name us. So if you apply here, to my campus and then you name me in your application materials, they're going to send me your application. And then I'm going to say, oh yeah, I remember talking to this student and they were really great. They were really serious. They had a really great experience. They've been in this area for a while. I think that they'll do well here in this program. Let me say, yes, I will accept them. I will advise them, or I will be on their committee. Then the university sees that you have support within the university and they'll accept you. So it's very important to choose your school based on your interests, not trying to conform to the interests of the school, right? And then also it is extremely important that you build a relationship with the professors before you apply. People don't always do that. And I'm not sure that that's common knowledge, but it's very helpful, okay? And so what we want to do next is talk about statements. And this is an area that I really love. This is an area that I work in a lot, that I mentor people in a lot. So I have recruited many students from Nigeria, and they're actually here in the US doing their PhD. And I work with them a lot on statements of purpose, personal histories, and their CVs, basically your academic resume. So we're gonna talk to or hear from our panelists on how they went through that process of putting together their statements of purpose, their personal statement, and what do you think the difference is between those two statements? How did you prepare for it? And so we will start with Susan, and then Chisara, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think that a person's drive for wanting to pursue graduate studies and the originality that you bring to your essay are attributes that the admissions board is keen on seeing on paper. So every time I pick a pen to write or a keyboard to type, the question was always, what drives or motivates you? That was central to everything I wrote about in my statement of purpose. And the SOP, as it's called, is an individual's first impression on their readers. And it is what actually becomes a decisive force as to whether or not you're fit for any program. And so this is why I think it is significant to make a very powerful opening that summarizes why you want to pursue graduate school. And that is exactly what I did. Because I knew that this is an essay where I actually tell my story about who I am and why I deserve to be a part of the university's community. My CV, resume, transcripts are wonderful and pivotal to my application packet, but they would only give very skeletal information about me. But it was the SOP, and it is the SOP that would show the admissions committee what kind of person I am, what my strengths and weaknesses are, and give them the chance to get to know me, other than what I have on my portfolio. And now hear this, it is important not to regurgitate what everyone else is writing. Have someone else proofread and edit your papers for you. Be original, less generic. And one thing I remember one of my professors from the University of Lagos told me is show rather than tell. And let me think of one example. You'll perhaps always find this statement in the first drafts. My academic experiences in my undergraduate study have taught me how to become a better researcher. Yeah, so the question becomes, and so what? And if you notice, this statement has not really said anything significant that one would pick up on or write a story about, because it does not paint a full picture. And so in responding to this statement, for example, how about, as an undergraduate, I have had the privilege of working with and analyzing primary sources which I obtained from so-and-so archives. And this training is added to my research skills, not just on analysis and interpretation, but has also revealed to me the challenges of working with primary sources. Now here, the board knows that you are aware of the challenges of doing research, that it isn't some low-hanging fruit, but more importantly, that you are up to the task because you have experience. So don't directly say that you are a researcher, demonstrate that you are a researcher. Another very common cliche that I thought to avoid when writing my SOP is this idea of eulogizing or paying homage to institutions through your SOP. It is good in a few ways, but only when done right. I believe it's essential to avoid expressions like, I'm applying to school A because it is world-class and legendary, or I'm honored to apply for the PhD program in university because I've always loved University A for as long as I can remember. And I believe that I will blossom your very renowned institution if I'm admitted. Dear friend, renowned institutions know that they are prestigious, and simply reminding them of what they already know this way on your SOP will do nothing to your application. Again, show rather than tell. What is it about that institution that intrigues you? It could be a specific faculty member there whose work dovetails yours. It could be a precise interdisciplinary resource that the university possesses. It could be a particular library or mentorship opportunities and scholarly interactions there. These are ways of demonstrating that you have done your research and that you know what you know. Write succinctly, but let your statements be very discernible. And this is why most SOPs are about 1,000 words or less. Use a strong opening, close it very strongly, employ good transition statements. Use, however, therefore, consequently, additional sparingly too. All the paragraphs must connect and tie in very easily. Make sure everything is linked with continuity and focus. Personally, I found using the chronological decor to be quite easy and useful. So you're not jumping from talking about your experiences during your undergraduate studies to why you chose University A and then back to who or what motivates you. Ultimately, you will employ the same methods in your research papers in graduate school when you're admitted. I could go on, but the general idea is to draw on and write those things that complement your own academic ambitions and application dossier.
All right, so we definitely want to acknowledge Odunayo. And so thank you so much for joining us. So we're just talking about these statements. So, we'll let you go as well after Elizabeth. So Chisara, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you. So for the statement of purpose, first I want to say is you have to put it at the back of your mind that you're not the only one applying to these schools. There are thousands of people applying to these schools and you cannot afford to be lazy. You cannot afford to put together a shabby work statement and expect to gain admission in any North American institution or any institution in the world. So you have to sit up and do the work. So first I want to say is that you should give your statement of purpose quite some time to put it together. So it's not something you just have to rush. That worked for me because I gave it some time, came back to look at it again, and then felt, okay, made some corrections or added some things I felt I needed to say, because this is, just like the first speaker said, this is something that introduces you to the committee, that would grant you this admission. So the first thing I think I want to mention is the hook. Some people try to tell a story, that captures the reader. First, what I want to mention is that there has to be something that keeps the interest of whoever is reading this to keep on reading. So if it's not captivating, they move on to the next person, because you are not just the only person. So you have to know what to, either you are telling a story, or something that captivates whoever is reading your statement of purpose. And Another thing is, for me, I told a story. I told a story of what motivated me to go into that research area. I told a story of something that was very real, because I also think, like the last speaker said, they know these people have been on this committee for quite some time. They know some things that are not real, right? So you have to, as much as you want to tell a story, don't be outrageous in that story. So just something very relatable, right? So that's also like shows you can tell a story or something to show your motivation, what motivates you, because whoever wants to work with you, or even the committee wants to know that, because PhD is quite strenuous, I would use that word. It's a long journey. They also want to know that there's something driving you, even when it gets tougher, right? So that worked for me because I put out my motivation, what motivated me to go into this field. And another thing is showing your skills, like she said, mentioning the methodology, not just you telling, you also showing that this is, you know how to do this, you are going to do this, you know how to interpret primary sources, from the various archives. Maybe you have to mention, the archives here in Nigeria, if you are working in Nigeria, right? So, and again, that shows your skill, not just telling them that you know how to do this. You also have to show. And like I mentioned in the beginning about don't be lazy, I want to mention that you have to be concise. You have to read your work, be concise. I realized, as someone who did my first degree and second degree in Nigeria, when I went to do my PhD, I realized that the way we write in Nigeria is quite different. We make all those flowery words and those big words, thinking that please keep it simple. Keep it simple. You are not impressing a professor who has already been there, right? So you wouldn't want to be using the big words. At the end of the day, you are not making any sense. So your statement of purpose, as much as you want to impress, please don't overdo it. Be concise, be very clear. And one thing I would want to say, because I also had that problem about clarity, is that if you want to know if you are very clear, you can read it to someone, right? You can read it to someone and say, did you understand what I'm trying to say here? And the person would want to, if the person didn't understand, then you know that that line or that paragraph or what you are writing was not clear enough. Because you have to be clear for whoever is reading your work to understand you, to relate with what you're saying. So clarity is very important. Being concise is very important. Above all, I also want to mention that it is very important that you read your statement of purpose again and again. Don't be in a hurry. And that's why I said you should give yourself some time to put this together. Don't be in a hurry, because I don't know the impression that you might be putting out there when you have a lot of errors in your work. Maybe you want to write this, and it's not just like if you have a lot of errors, it shows you're not serious. It shows you might be a lazy student, because you are supposed to put, and you are not the only person. You have very exceptional students or exceptional candidates applying from all over the world. So you have to if you have to do it well. That's what I want to add.
Shegoni. Thank you so much. You know what? I have to say, Inumi Dungon láti rí gbogbo àwọn ènìyàn ní Nigeria nígbà tí wọ́n kọ́ àwọn when you write all of your notes. I see you. I see you taking notes, and I'm very happy that you are serious about this conversation. So we want to move on and cover some of the other topics that we have. So I just ask people to, limit their response to about a minute or so. And we have a couple of more. So Elizabeth, we'll hear from you and then Odunayo.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Martin. Impressive Yoruba, by the way. When I first started writing, I used to think of myself as a good writer. So I would write, and my style of writing used to be like, I write and then I'm building, and then towards the end I hit the climax, and then the person is like, boom, I delivered my point. But actually, that is not effective at all. And I had to learn this the hard way. And I find that this is not just me. This happens to many people. So for your SOP, to echo the points that other panelists have said, you really need to hook your reader from the beginning to the end. It's not about climax or anticlimax, no. And one strategy that works for me and that I have advised other people to use over the years is that make it a story. And as to really, really echo what Susanna said, your SOP is that part that personalizes you and shows your humanity to your readers. Your SOP and your recommendation letter, you cannot overflog those. The quality of those have to be top notch. So the strategy I usually recommend is situate yourself, your past, your present, and your future in your SOP. And in doing that, highlight how the institution you're applying to helps you, or the program you're applying to is necessary or it is important for you to get to where you're headed, right? So your past, your undergraduate, showing your skill set, all of that, as Chisara and Susan have mentioned. Your present, this is what I'm doing right now. Your future, I want to be one of the top consultants in the world, but I do need this degree from your institution, and I do need this professor to train me. Nothing overly flowery, but you do need to show how important that institution is to where you're headed. Another point that I think this also happened to me is that you need to pay attention to the guidelines for your statement of purpose. Almost every institution has a guideline. Almost every institution has a guideline. Really read it, and when possible, you can even use the same words back in your SOP. For example, something that I observed, and then I noticed that when I actually gained admission into Notre Dame, before and after, was that Notre Dame Department of Anthropology really prioritizes interdisciplinary approach to anthropology, right? And so when I wrote my SOP, I used the word again, and this again happens with grant writing after you get admission and you become a graduate student. You do need some of these keywords, which shows that you pay attention to details, first of all, and second of all, it positions you as a great fit for the institution. So in my SOP, I then wrote, my research requires an interdisciplinary perspective, blah, 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 blah. And Notre Dame offers this to me. And that was really what was on the website. Like, this is what we're giving, this is what we focus on. And that really, and I've seen that happen even after I gained admission. So basically, pay attention to the guidelines, identify what they're looking for, and see how you position yourself to be that person that they're looking for. And the last point is review. It would do you a world of good, not just to read and review by yourself, but to write to people who are in the institutions, perhaps graduate students, or your friends and acquaintances in other academic institutions abroad, to help you review, because they identify some of these points. Sometimes they even give you some technical jargon to include, which increases your professionalism, in your SOP. So trying to cap all of that point under 1 minute, I think I should stop there. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. And so we're going to do something a little bit different going forward. So so that we can cover some of these other really, really important areas and get some of your responses on it. So I will be giving specific questions to specific panelists, going forward. But we can start with you, Odunayo, if that is okay with you. So we're coming off of this conversation about the statement of purpose. I saw that we also have a question about the personal statement, so we'll get to that during our question period in about 13 minutes. But for now, I want to just say something and just cover a topic we didn't really get to hit, the application fee waiver. And our next subject will be about the writing sample. So what is a good writing sample? So that's going to be your question, Odunayo. So and then the other topics are coursework and qualifying exam. So Elizabeth, you can respond on that. So what is that process like? I have one student who is in Nigeria right now doing her preliminary field research. She's getting ready to do an independent study with me to get ready for her qualifying exams, which you have to do before you do your official field work. So you can take that question, and then adjusting to a new academic culture. Again, you've kind of noticed, or mentioned this already, that some of the things that you are used to in the academic culture in Nigeria might be different in the academic culture to, where you're applying abroad. So I would really like to hear what you have to say about that, Chisara. And then conducting field work, or actually, I think, Chisara, you're conducting field work right now. So maybe I'd like to hear from you on the conducting field work and sourcing for external funding, because that is always an issue as well. And for people who are coming from abroad, sometimes there are certain types of funding that you might not be eligible for if you're not a citizen of the area that you're going to. So that's always an interesting conversation for students. So Chisara, I would like to hear what you have to say about conducting field research and sourcing for external funding. And then about writing your dissertation and preparing for the job market. Susan, I would love to hear what you have to say about that. And then we can come back to that question of adjusting to the new academic culture. And we could hear from everybody on that one, I suppose, if we have time. So next up, we have Odunayo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. My name is Odunayo Adeojo. I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate at West Virginia University, studying history. I apologize for joining late. I miscalculated the time. But I'm here, and the question Dr. Martin posed to me is, what is a good writing sample? So one thing that I know for sure when submitting a writing sample is you want to, if you have written, you have some written works already, you want to pick that one that embodies what you have, said within your statement of purpose. So for instance, you mentioned that, I know how to do this, I've been writing for this number of years. You want to pick that writing sample that does that. So for example, if you're applying for, say, history, and you mentioned that you've been doing research for a number of years, you want to ensure that that writing sample, say, has correct citations. Most universities in the US they use Chicago manual style. You want to ensure that your writing sample indeed has that correct citation. You want to ensure that your writing sample is coherent. You're not using bogus grammars. You don't need your reader to have a Britannica beside them to say, oh, according to babara bababa, you don't want all those things. You want it to sound well. And, when Elizabeth was talking, she did say that she writes in a way that she builds up to a point. And that was how I was writing when I was in Nigeria. You know, say I want to write about Nigeria, and I like, you know, talk about the continent of Africa, then talk about West Africa before talking about Nigeria. No, no, no. So you want to edit that writing sample to go straight to that argument that you're making. Say if it's an article, if you've, you know, had maybe publications. But in my own case, I took a chapter from my dissertation, the chapter that, you know, I felt really good about. I was so proud of that chapter, you know, and I was like, you know, this is my best shot. Let me just put this one out to show what exactly I can bring, you know, to the table. And just the same way as your SOP speaks for you in the room, that writing sample is like something that will support your SOP. Say they were reading and like, I love this candidate. Okay, you know, let's look at the writing sample. Aha, this even, you know, adds more spice to the sauce, if you get what I mean. So you want to choose that writing sample that's really good, you know, and this is where mentorship comes in. Or if you have somebody that you look up to and that person is really vast in the admission processes within the US. I remember when I was applying, Professor Said Aderito was the one who was really pivotal in reading my application, reading my SOP, reading my writing sample. You know, say if you were saying within your SOP, you know, I would, you know, I want to study, say, gender, for example, since we have all women panel here, gender, for example, and your SOP is talking about politics. You see, it doesn't really, you know, cut it. So you want to ensure that you take that into account as well. So have that person read for you, and this person is reading to sort of affirm what you're submitting, not reading to edit jargons. There's a difference. So again, I think it was Chizara that said, don't be lazy. If you see that you have a writing sample, but in your mind, deep down in your mind, you know that this is not really good to give to this person to read, you want to go over it, read it, write it again if you need to, you know, to ensure that what you're sending to this person is not something that will give the person headache. You want to make sure that, because when you're reading, you want to enjoy that piece that you're reading. So have the interest of your reader in your mind too, so that you know that whenever you submit this, the person will even be more proud to add some maybe points or ideas that they think might fit into what you're writing. So take that also into account, ensure that everything you're writing all comes together and makes a beautiful writing sample. I think with that, you should be good.
Yes, so I want to move on to Elizabeth. It seems that we have lost Chisara. So maybe if you all are interested in maybe having me to speak with you or to mentor or advise you in some way, you can contact me at wasinmi@gmail.com. I have also co-founded an educational advocacy in Nigeria that is centered around helping students to get into college and to source funding for themselves or to fund them. So that's mainly for undergraduate, but I'm sure that in time we'll add graduate. But for me, myself, I definitely advise graduate students, also new PhDs who are on the job market. I also mentor and advise them. So, contact Wasimi and, put your mind to rest. Come and rest. Okay, Wasimi, come and rest with me. And don't let it be stressful for you to, go onto the job market and write these statements. There is so much more that I want to share with you about writing statements, about writing samples, about personal statements, all of these things. And you can definitely, or the whole process of applying and talking to professors, you definitely can advise. I can definitely advise you. You can come and you can ask me questions. So just go ahead and contact me if you're interested in that. So we're going to hear from Elizabeth and then Susan, and then we'll give each one of you about a minute and a half, and then we'll move into our question and answer period. And you could also ask me anything or ask our distinguished panelists anything. So Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Martin, for the questions, because I think I value this question a lot, because it's not just about getting into grad school, it's also about thriving in grad school. And I'm sure that everyone on this panel has so much to say about thriving in grad school. I'm sure, like, we could write like 52 books from that's a bit of an exaggeration, but anyway, the point is, it's not just about getting admission into grad school, it's about thriving in grad school. And thriving in grad school means learning the system. When I first left Nigeria for my master's degree at UCL, I did struggle a lot. And many of us would have, what's it called now? I can't remember the word, but it's usually when you are the top in a particular environment, and then you are in an environment that has many tops from different environments, and you have to be a top in that environment. It is a struggle. For you to get admission into grad school, you must have been very good, either professionally or academically. So that means that you must have led a pack somehow. Maybe not the first three, but you would have topped the pack. And so what that tells you is, for everyone in grad school, they were leading a pack. So you now have to compete with the tops of the tops through grad school. It's not really a competition. It's really more about thriving than competing. And learning the ropes is very important. So for me, I do have a couple of points here to share. And I think the first thing is to be open to learning. You have to be open to unlearning and relearning. And part of the points that I have seen on this side of the continent, on this side of the world, is that you have to ask questions. Don't be intimidated. Don't be shy to ask questions. Always ask questions. You would always get answers. And you can ask questions from your professors. You can ask questions from your peers. I would even say that maybe in the first couple of weeks after you transition into grad school, it might be useful for you to invite maybe a senior colleague to coffee and then ask, how do things work here? Maybe not really emulating what they have done to survive, because it's different strokes for different folks, right? But it gives you an idea of the threshold that you are starting from. And then you learn how you need to thrive within that community. But it's important to learn from other people's experiences, and it's important to have peer-to-peer relationship. It works out in different ways for different people. Peer-to-peer might be you finding a community within your cohort. It might be you finding community in the cohort above you or after you, but you do need that community to survive. It's very difficult to survive in silos. I'm trying not to share too much, but I think the first thing here is be open to learning, unlearning, relearning. The other thing to prioritize is time management. If you can read about time management, please do read about it before you start. Maybe the couple of days before your program start, you do need it, because the issue is you have so many things thrown at you at once. But the important bit is to learn what to prioritize. So it's like throwing 22 balls at you. You should know which balls to catch first and which balls to go back later to pick up from the ground. And, in that way, you're not failing, or you're not missing out any points. You're just prioritizing what you need to prioritize part-time. And I think that's really important in surviving grad school coursework and qualifying exams. For qualifying exams, it's different from different institutions. For different institutions, it's also different for different programs within the same institution. So again, I think the important bit here is peer-to-peer mentorship. You really cannot overemphasize learning from other people who have gone ahead of you in your program, and really learning to prioritize how you manage your time. I feel like this starts from applying to grad school, because again, many people who apply to grad school are doing other things at the same time as they're applying, right? So through that process, you have to learn to prioritize your time. And then transitioning into grad school, you really do have to learn to prioritize your time. And I feel like another important bit is to learn how to read leisurely, because it's not just about sitting at a desk and studying. Many of us spend time on our phones. Sometimes a quick Google search about a terminology on our phone while reclining or eating breakfast might even sink faster than spending 3 hours in the library studying. So basically, I would say that maybe learn to integrate leisure reading into your lifestyle. If you're on a bus going somewhere, you can Google and read. Basically, for me, it works wonders, because that's how I learn, because there's less pressure than sitting at a desk. So I think I can stop there and then pass on the baton to the next person.
Yeah, and one thing that I will say and add to that is that I teach my students how to do something that I developed. It's a process I developed for myself when I was a PhD student, and it helps you to read more efficiently. So instead of spending days and days trying to read a book, I can read it in 2.5 hours because I trained myself on this process. And it's just by, opening, matter of fact, when you open a book, most of what you need to know should be in the intro. Most of the outline of the book should be in the intro. And so if you read the intro and you pick out the main idea, you pick out, the claims that they make, the evidence that they use to support those claims, and then, any questions that come to mind when you're reading it, and a few other things. If you do that, you can actually get through a book, and then you just read 1 or 2 chapters, in the middle of the book and read the conclusion. You can really pull out a lot from a book and read it way quicker, read articles way quicker with that method. I call that taking critical notes. So it's a critical note method. Again, if you would like to learn some more about these things, you can contact me, WAASINMI, Wasimi, @gmail.com. So we'll hear from Susan now.
Sure, thank you. So I am supposed to respond to writing my dissertation and preparing for the job market. I have not started writing my dissertation. I am in the early stages of doing research. However, I will share some of the tips that I have received on doing research and writing. I guess in writing the dissertation itself, it is necessary to keep close to a writing community that might hold you accountable. Many have found it useful to utilize what is called a buddy system, where you're working with someone else who is also writing their dissertation. That way you feel the right amount of pressure to work and to shift your focus to the work that needs to be completed. And it's also important that when you write, you stay in areas or places where, like the library, where talking is discouraged. That way you are not spending your time talking, chit-chatting or socializing, but you're actually paying attention to the work that needs to be done. And then if we shift the focus to the dissertation itself, it's pretty much all that we've been discussing about the writing sample, which Odwaya have talked a lot about, and the others on the panel. It is important to write clearly in your dissertation, to be very succinct. You're writing with clarity because you don't want to use verbose words that people have to keep asking, what point is she or he trying to make? it is important that when you do research for your dissertation, you also keep a journal. You're documenting every impression, every thought. And like Elizabeth mentioned, it is important to also read books that contrast with the subject matter that you're interested in before proceeding with that interview. That way will allow time for you to really keep your mind clear before any dialogue. You want to learn to question your own assumptions. You read and reread every colonial document. You recognize that every silenced voices are very crucial to your research as the ones that are active. So if you are with a document that discusses A and not B, then as a historian, I'm trained to ask myself, why is this not here? So it's what is called reading against and along the grain. You are conscious of the questions that your dissertation leaves very much open-ended. These are the ones that critics would go after. And always remember that the best writing will be criticized. You are not the first, you won't be the last, and it is okay to be frustrated. It is normal. You will encounter more writer's block than you do write. It is okay, but in the long run, it will play a very tremendous part in shaping your research and writing experience than anything else. I mean, this is what I hope to utilize while I do my research and in the long run, my dissertation.
Yeah, thank you for those words of wisdom. We really appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to my favorite part, which is to take your questions. So we do have some questions already from our webinar viewers in the chat. And I'm very sure Nigeria, right? We have a lot of questions probably among some of our guests there. So we want to take some from both, right? So we can start with the webinar questions since they're there, and then I will move to any of you in the room if you have a question. And if you have questions that we don't have time to address here, then you can, again, always email me at waasinmi@gmail.com, and I will attend to your questions there. So the first question was, how does a personal statement, or how personal can the personal statement be? What information do you consider as irrelevant in the personal statement? And when is a personal statement required alongside the statement of purpose? So I can address this question, and if any of you want to address it as well. But I will say quickly that a personal statement, usually they ask for both a personal statement and a statement of purpose. And the way that I tell my students to think about this is that a personal statement and a statement of purpose are the same, well, they're different paths to the same place. So what you're trying to do with both of these statements is to make sure that the university sees you as somebody who is qualified, who is able to, take up this really rigorous PhD program and finish it at their institution. That's what they want to know by asking you to write a personal statement and a statement of purpose. So there are both two different avenues to get to the same place. But a personal statement, so we've heard about the statement of purpose. It basically tells them about your history and trajectory as a researcher, as a critical thinker, as somebody who has spent time with this subject matter. What types of skills, have you enacted? What types of classes? What types of professional development? What types of experience have you had? So they want to know that in a statement of purpose, and they want to know how that experience has enhanced the way you're thinking about your research interest. But a personal statement anyways, they want to know what types of life experiences have you had that have shaped the way that you are engaging with your interest, with your research interest. So there are two different roads to get to the same place. So again, if you want to learn more about that, you can contact me, but we will pass it on to the panel. So how personal can a personal statement be? and how do you decide what's relevant or not? Odunayo, go ahead.
So I want to bring in a new dimension. So I don't know if you've talked about academic statements. So because I had to, come in as a teaching assistant to teach, side by side doing my program, I was asked for an academic statement in place of a personal, statement. I didn't have to submit a personal statement. So for an academic statement, you want to talk about your teaching philosophy, you want to talk about how you approach students. But again, if you have an opportunity to not teach while studying, please hug that opportunity as much as you can. I strongly advise that you just focus on your work and do not teach. If it's a research assistant, I think is far better than teaching assistant in my case and in my experience. But how personal can a personal statement be? Like Dr. Martin said, let whatever that you are, whatever experiences you are talking about within your personal statement, echo what has been said within your SOP, or try to merge with each other. For example, you want to ensure that fillers, what I call fillers, unnecessary information or too personal of information, don't put that. Don't put that. For example, if you had a particular experience in your childhood that shaped who you are today, you want to add that. I think that's a solid point. But say, very personal issues, I really don't know how personal that can go, but very unnecessary, things that you do you need this within an academic space? I think you can weigh that yourself. But let both your personal statement and your statement of purpose tie together. But if you need to submit an academic statement, ensure that it's your teaching philosophy that is being echoed within that.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, Elizabeth, would you like to respond?
I think Susan mentioned this, and I think Chisara also mentioned this previously, and it is to read the prompts from the institutions, because institutions ask for different things. I've read SOPs where they ask you for something really personal that happened in your life that changed your trajectory, something like that. In that case, you might need to go a bit personal, but as Odayo has also said, please gauge what is required, read the prompts, and try as much as you can to respond to the prompts. Also send it to someone to review and to check if you are answering the questions that have been asked of you.
Yeah, and what I would add before we take a question from our audience, our live audience, and round up our panel, I will say that I don't think that there is anything too personal with a personal statement. It's your life. And they want to know what actually caused you to get into this field of study. Some people said, I had a student in gender studies, and he said that he saw the way that his grandmother, was treated in their community, which made him want to study how women, are treated in certain traditional Igbo settings. I know a colleague who wrote a Fulbright proposal, and, she talked about in her personal statement how she was raped during a raid, and how that affected her life, but also made her ask certain questions that affected her research later on, in life. And so I don't think that there's anything too personal. It's your story. And as long as you can tell the story, first of all, telling stories is good because it draws people in. And then you make them to know how this story has been relevant in helping you to develop your research interest. So I don't think that there's anything too personal. So is there a question from our audience that, Susan maybe could be the first one to respond? So you would have to, I don't know who's running the session there. You have to unmute, but is there a question?
Good evening. We can't take any more questions there because it's the end of the session and the next one is to start in a few minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay, no problem. No wahala. So anyways, if you want to talk with me, if you have questions that have not been answered, I see that there was a question on the I-20 form. I definitely have helped students to get their visas from Nigeria. It has been difficult, but I have, helped them in that process. Mogbadura si Olorun fun awon akeko mi. I prayed. It took a lot of prayer, but we were able to do it. So if you have any questions, please do email me. Like I said, waasinmi@gmail.com. I will attend to your questions. I love mentoring. I love doing this kind of a thing. And I'm co-founding an organization to help students, college students in Nigeria. So I am here for this purpose. So thank you so much to all of our distinguished guests and our other guests that dropped off. We thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you have shared. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and I'm excited for all of you. I don't know exactly where you are in your programs, but I'm excited for all of you in finishing your programs. This is a big deal, getting your PhD, not just that you're abroad, but that you are a part of this 2% of the, population that has this degree. And I have great expectations for your future. So thank you so much for giving back with this conversation. And thank you all in Nigeria for listening, for taking notes, for being serious, and for contacting me later. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.